Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Catalyst After Town Hall discussion on Cardano governance. I'm Kenric Nelson, and my co-host is Stephen Whitenstall. We are going to lead a discussion about the latest report that we've been working on following the Edinburgh workshop. And the title of this report is From Open Corporation to Digital Nation. And we'll explain what those two terms mean and what the differences are. The way we're going to do this meeting is through a process that I've been learning about from Sociocracy. So the discussion will at times be open to anyone to contribute, but to kind of make sure that we get a broad range of views, we're going to start with a circle of 3 to 5 additional people from myself and Stephen. And we're looking for volunteers, particularly if you might want to either co-author or be an active commentator on the report, or if you're a critic of our point of view about trying to move towards a democratic pluralism approach to our governance. And before I go any further, let me add the link in this chat to the report itself. And a little later, maybe I'll share my screen too, so that you can see if you don't have access. Let's see, just a moment here. Let me bring up my chat. Okay, there is the report link. And let me find the right page. Okay, I think I've got it. Okay, can you see my page now?
Yep, we can see it. Yep.
Okay, excellent, great. So as a means of getting started, Stephen and I have been writing a series of reports on governance going back to Fund 7 and then continuing through the work on CIP 1694. While I'm enthusiastic about the Cardano community and its attempts to decentralize the governance, I've also been critical as to whether CIP 1694 will actually achieve that. We're going to go through sort of both positive steps that I think are happening within 1694 and then also concerns. But before we get started, I'd like a group of volunteers to use the icon to raise your hand if you'd like to be an active participant in this discussion rather than just a listener. Please raise your hand now, and we're going to form an impromptu sociocratic circle, and we'll go in rounds to get inputs from a variety of people. And again, I'm particularly looking for both potential contributors and critics, people who maybe disagree with our points of view. All right. Okay. I think okay, we've got 6 actually. And as Steve cautioned me for this impromptu round, it's probably best to keep it to 3 to 5. So I'm going to go in order first, I think, and then that would be, in my order, it was Ed, Sean, Megan, Jose, and Felix. Let's try that, and then Johnny, you're going to get a chance to contribute during the discussion, but I think for now, we're going to keep, well, what do you think? What do you think, Steve? Can we manage 8, or is that too much?
Yeah, I think it could be fine. We do need to keep it brief if you're,
yeah.
if you
I'll tell you what, why don't we have Johnny be part of the circle too? And did you capture that list, Stephen? Or did someone capture it?
If someone could paste it in the chat.
Yeah, if someone could Okay, so it was Ed, Megan, Jose, Felix, Johnny, and I think there was one other person. Oh, Sean.
Did you want to
Those
share?
six.
Did you want to share the document, Kenric, or the run sheet?
Yes, it's in the chat. I did share it.
No, the run sheet. Do you want to share the
Oh,
run
the
sheet?
run sheet too. Yes, you're right.
I can
Thank
do
you
that.
for the-
Hold on
All
a
right,
sec.
if you could do
And
that,
just
please,
sorry to interrupt, but this is Megan. I'm actually sitting behind my computer, but joined by two other members. So it's actually Mermoz who would like to participate. So if you want to put Mermoz's name instead of Megan.
Okay, thanks, Megan. Terrific.
Could you post that, Megan?
And while they're doing that, I'll just explain. I've been learning about sociocracy, which emphasizes consent as a way to make decisions in groups. And you form circles, and then those circles connect and still can form hierarchies. But at each level, it's a circle that's making decisions rather than an individual. And so, for instance, today I will act as the leader, but I won't be able to make decisions for the group on my own. And Stephen is going to act as a facilitator to guide the whole discussion. And our very first round will be what's called a check-in, where you just take 1 minute and just describe how your day's going as context for being here today for the discussion. And I think we'll always go in the same order to keep things simple. So if we can have that order in the chat, I'll kick off. As a check-in, I'm doing great. We have wonderful weather here in New England, but during these calls, I have to keep my windows closed because they're doing construction across the street. And then Ed, if you could just take 1 minute to introduce yourself and tell us how your day's going.
Hey, I'm Ed. I live in Seattle. Day's going really well. I'm excited about this topic.
If I can take over facilitation now, Kenric. Jose is next.
Yes.
Yeah. How's your day going, Jose?
I didn't get. Was it me? Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. So
Okay. So yeah. Hi everyone. I'm Jose Gamboa. Day's doing great. It's my first work day since coming back from Edinburgh. I was in vacation and just came back to home, which is in Colombia, today. So glad to be part of this conversation as a first day.
Great. I'll move on quickly for quick introductions. Now, Sean next.
Hey guys, thanks for being here. My name's Sean. I'm the creator of Littercoin from Ireland. Just finished my day job home from work. I work as a software developer and building AI systems so I can get better at making my own apps. So now from one job to the next.
Thanks, Sean. Okay, I hope I get the name right. Mermoz?
Yeah, I'm Mermoz. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Mermoz from Cameroon. I'm a researcher interested in a lot of different topics. And here the day was pretty amazing because we have the rains just started to come back here. So it's good for the crops. So we are happy about that.
That's great.
Awesome. Great to have you with us.
That's great to hear, Mermoz. Okay, next we have Felix.
I'm Felix from Swarm and other stuff. Mostly here to be a punk in all things governance, to learn a lot, and hopefully to also add some nice thoughts to everything. And thanks a lot for hosting this, Ken and Stephen.
And last but not least, Johnny.
Hello, everyone. Just checking in. I am currently enjoying fun employment and brushing up on my software engineering and coding skills.
Thank you, Johnny. Okay,
Steve, you're part of the circle, so why don't you do your own check-in too?
Oh, right. Okay, I'm Stephen. I'm kind of don't know what to say now because you put me on the spot, Kenric. So I'm facilitating this governance work group, and I've been involved with Kenric for a few years now, actually, on governance research and facilitation in the community. You may have noticed that I did something for CGO, which Kenric was part of, actually, Community Governance Oversight. But should we move on now to do you want to move on now to the first subject, Kenric? Should we?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, let's do that.
If anyone's got access to the run sheet, should I just run through that then? Like,
Yes.
okay, the first thing is
I-
I'll cover the subject areas if you like. Okay,
Thank
so
you.
we've just done a check-in rounds, and you have links in chat to the document and to the run sheet. The subject areas we hope to cover, we may not cover everything, is open corporation or digital nation, Cardano's centralized governance plan and its consequences, how we can assure a transition to a digital nation, and if we have time, we may not have time, layered defense for civil resistance. Now, so we're going to use the circle members to discuss these subjects, and we will begin with spending around about 25 minutes on open corporation or digital nation. And we'd welcome comments, and here's some pointers. What would be the characteristics of an open corporation? Should it be publicly owned and public managed? And what are the characteristics of a digital nation? Is citizenship central rather than ownership? Kenric, would you like to say a little bit about that before we?
Yeah, I'll start each round with sort of an introduction to what I've accomplished so far with the report.
Okay.
And then as we progress, you can kind of start with question rounds, then reaction rounds, and then maybe objection rounds, towards the end when you have a little bit more context. And the thoughts around open corporation and digital nation came to me after the Edinburgh conference for two reasons. One is that Denisa Hazen kind of suggested from IOG, suggested an aspirational goal of a digital nation. And I think that is an important thing maybe that we should be working towards as a community. But when you think about public governance of a nation, the very first thing is a definition of citizenship. And we're really lacking that right now within the Cardano community, and it's lacking within the CIP 1694 proposal. What we have instead is a model of ownership, where if you own ADA coins, then that's your invitation to be a participant in the Cardano governance. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Almost all of the cryptocurrencies are kind of starting with that as a starting point. But there's a disconnect between the aspiration and what we're actually implementing. And in particular, I'm calling it an open corporation as opposed to a public corporation. A public corporation is one that is publicly owned, but typically privately managed, in that the public owners will elect the board of directors, but then the board of directors typically appoints executives, and then executives hire a team, and all of that is done privately. Whereas what's different with Cardano and more generally with the cryptocurrency is the management is also public. So I think maybe open corporation is a model here. But that can be centralized. We'll get to that a little bit more. But the problem is that it's potentially a centralized approach given this one coin, one vote model. I won't go into the details of that yet, but maybe let's just start with sort of a question round about this contrast between an open corporation and a digital nation. What are your thoughts or questions about that?
Okay, I'll go around our list again. So over to you, Ed. What are your thoughts on the contrast between an open corporation and a digital nation, or any other thoughts on this subject?
Well, I'm not sure I'm going to answer the question directly by the definition, but there's three sort of models to think about. In this may be other terminology, but plutocratic, which is basically one coin, one vote. Democratic, which is one person, one vote, if you will. And then there's pluralistic, where there's going to be different sets of interests going on. One of those will be, based on coin holders. Another one might be another group around a particular set of interests, like stake pool operators, for example. And others being more of a democratic perspective. And so where I kind of land on this in practical terms is pluralistic is the best we can hope for in terms of the process or a way towards that. In this white paper, there's mention of digital identity, and I have a lot to say on that topic, but I don't want to take too much. But I will just sort of tease that digital identity is a question of, well, what is the credential that we're after? If it's after identifying one unique person, then, or proof of personhood or proof of unique person, then that's a little more specific topic to cover. But that's some initial thoughts on this whole topic.
Okay, thanks, Ed. I mean, that so the focus there was not totally in response, was the pluralistic as being the best possible option. So I've made a note of that as well. But let's carry on now to Sean. What's your views on the
I still don't really have a clear understanding of these concepts, so I think I'm still in the I need more information camp. But I just would like to say, just on the issue of governance, that I think our voter alignment is not clear. It's not clear what different people want. And I have an idea for a future proposal, and I don't care if I do it or someone else does it. I just think it needs to be done where you could potentially mint a value as an NFT. So let's say I'm interested in poverty. I can mint a value that represents poverty, and then we can weigh the voter weight. So if you register to vote, lockdown, and then you can judge the what's the word I'm looking for? You can judge what the community is interested in, or where their values are aligned. So that's just all I have to say about that.
I think that's a fascinating input into the discussion. I mean, particularly how presents challenges into how we capture people's values and what should we align with and what we shouldn't align with. But I'm moving on now to address this question to Mermoz on open corporation or.
And actually, just before you start, just to clarify, I think asking questions is a good use of this round. So as Sean was saying, we're only taking a moment to introduce the ideas, but if you have some clear questions, then either Steve or I could respond to that to get some clarification on these concepts.
Okay, yeah, questions as well, Mermoz?
Okay. As for now, what I think is that it's not possible to achieve either way, open corporation or digital nation, because to achieve full open corporation as we want, as some people will want in the community, other people won't be on board with that, and it will create like a split. And digital nation will basically do the same, because to reach that point, there needs to be more collaboration and more kind of leveling of knowledge about the whole system, the whole ecosystem that we are trying to build. So in this regard, it's not really feasible right now. There needs to be a lot of teaching and a lot of leveling of knowledge so that it can function as a ground base and as a ideology, because you cannot build any nation without any ideology, without any input thoughts in that. And to reach that is going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort. So right now, where I stand is that there needs to be a little bit of both, and probably slowly transitioning to digital nation as the whole ecosystem is built and everything that goes within the philosophy is more stable and well taught. That's my take on that for now.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Mermoz. I mean, again, if there's any questions on the concepts being described here, feel free to ask that. And I'll move on now to Jose. Do you have any questions or thoughts on this subject?
Thank you. Yeah, I'd say that they're not necessarily competing concepts, the open corporation and the digital nation, in the sense that a digital nation, I think it's a topic of having a common purpose and not being constrained as citizens of that nation by the current set of rules and the current system of countries, and just being able to belong to an organization or to a nation, which is basically a group of people that have a set of values and a set of things in common that brings them together. So you can opt in and define a set of rules there. So it's probably more of an evolution. Maybe an open corporation is a mechanism that can help us to get things done, organize, because absolute decentralization is chaos, and having an open corporation is maybe a way of centralizing some of the things, but of course by decentralized inputs and by being sure that whoever is going to execute and deliver on the priorities that are agreed by the community is also accountable to the community. So I'd say that's probably not competing, but more of an evolution from one to the next, if I get the concept right.
Great. I think that's again the theme coming out here is one of maybe not either or, maybe an evolutionary approach, issues of alignment as well. So thanks for that, Jose. That's great. Now, can move on now to Felix. What are your thoughts on the contrast or the issues between open corporation or digital nation?
Both are quite shitty systems, that they focus on setting up organizations and systems rather than emphasizing on the freedom and, let's say, unconformity of individuals. And both of them don't give any objectives how to become obsolete, actually. Because for my objective, governance should always have the highest goal to become obsolete. So the highest governance is this one which is not needed, because individuals don't need governance. When they are well-informed, well-educated, as more stupid people you have, as more governance you need. So the question this then actually is corporate governance and stand off to you love it, Stephen. and the digital nation is, how do they compare the empathizing the freedom of individuals to each other?
Yeah, I mean that's a nice contrast to kind of a counterpoint to what other people are saying, because I suppose you're focusing more on the individualistic liberty, you know, and freedoms, and there any system that you build, you know, tends to you know, constrain individual liberty. But then, as I mean, Jose, you talked about, you know, total decentralization being utter chaos. So there's a contrast there. But also, your other interesting point I picked up on was, you know, the importance of education, Felix. You know, so so I made a note of that. I'll carry on to Johnny. What's your thoughts on open corporation or digital nation? And you know, should we be evolving from one or the other, or are there other models we should consider, Johnny?
You know, I think there's arguments and stakeholders and constituencies that would make the case for either one. I'd actually like to take a more of the middle of the road approach to kind of strawman and steelman both considerations. I actually think that governance is a bit of an overloaded term, which in its broadest sense is purely an exercise in decision rights frameworks, or the allocation of rights to arrive at decisions, hopefully good and effective ones. But it might depend on who you ask, what is a good and effective decision? I think to properly study this topic with intellectual rigor and honesty, we kind of need to take a multimodal approach. I think the term governance is, you know, severely overloaded. The pillars of Voltaire are on-chain governance, institutions, a constitution, and democratic consent, or also known as preference signaling via dReps and liquid democracy. I've read the paper by Kenric, and you know, I think there may be, you know, there's been a lot of talk about this idea of minimum viable governance. And I sometimes wonder if we might not be projecting or aspiring to too much for what we're trying to accomplish, what Cardano is trying to accomplish with minimum viable governance here. And I wonder if you know, it might not be possible, or we might be asking too much with you know, this idea of you know, maybe perhaps, you know, Cardano is more of a network, a telecommunications network, as opposed to a nation state or a network state. And so, you know, I like the dichotomy of the comparison between an open corporation and a digital nation. And, you know, my gut kind of tells me that the aspirations for a digital nation might be a bit ahead of its time.
Thanks for that, Johnny. I mean, it's a nice issue. I pick up on some of them. I like your concept of, you know, governance being a loaded term, and that kind of like, you know, it feeds in complements maybe with Felix's point that, you know, maybe we need to explode some of these contexts and have more atomic conversations, which are more appropriate. And also, you can suffer from sort of semantic slippage there if you try and put everything into one bag, which doesn't really fit. The minimal viable governance thing has been touted as a kind of one of the central aims, if people regret me for 1694, and maybe that is overloaded, you know, or maybe it is not a total governance solution. How would you like to now move on?
Actually, I want to just one follow up on that, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure.
You know, I think that minimum viable governance, you have to kind of ask and look at minimum viable for who, right? And I think in some ways it's minimum viable for IOG, right? But I certainly think it falls short of minimum viable for a network state or a digital government, digital nation.
Right. So there's a kind of like maybe a kind of false dichotomy there, where we're building an MVG for a corporation to transition to a decentralized corporation, not to build a network state. Is that what you would say? How, you know? So
absolutely,
right.
Absolutely. The issues that we have to study around SSI and even citizen assemblies and holons and holocracies. This minimum MVG doesn't even begin to attempt to try to address those considerations.
Thanks, John. Kenric, would you like to move on to reactions and
yeah, and why don't we? I think we can go to the next category if you think, looking at the time.
Thanks.
And in the and also transition to more of a reaction round to the theses that are being presented. And as we go forward, keep in mind that I'm looking for some of you to be volunteers to either critique or hash out the actual report. And after the meeting, you can kind of let us know if you want to be an active participant in this.
Okay, I'll give a brief.
And I think Johnny's, what is that, Stephen?
No, go on. Well, you're just talking, want to respond to Johnny.
I think Johnny's point is a good lead in to the question of the third section of the report is titled Cardano's Centralized Governance Plan and Its Consequences. And I'll present this as kind of a thesis, but then ask for sort of reactions to that. There's some good news actually on this front. So one of the things I've been concerned about is if it's a corporate model, then there are some guidelines under public corporations that should be a cornerstone of our own work. And I'll put in the chat, it's also in the run sheet, some data here that shows actually the starting point is actually a positive sign. So within corporate governance, there are boundaries of 5%, 10%, and 20% ownership that are considered to be kind of a path to centralization of an otherwise diversely held stock. And those boundaries are important because it's not the 50% boundary that maybe people think is the kind of critical threshold of control. It's actually a lot smaller than that. When you get to 20% control, that's considered, that's, that's called a, well, between 5 to 20% is called a principal interest in the corporation. And there are regulations that kick into play. And even I noticed in the current blockchain legislation that's going through the US, they use 20% as a criteria that you need to be below in order to justify the name of decentralized. Now, as a starting point, we do get below these. So the largest wallet right now is at 1.6 billion versus 35 billion is the current approximate circulation. So that's 4.6%. And then the Federation holdings from an anonymous source, and I don't know how accurate these are. It would be a good thing to check if it's publicly available. Is that IOG currently has 1.5 billion, 4.3%, and the others are lower than that. So these numbers then give a guidance that we are below the 5%, at least as a starting point. The concerns I have around the dRep program and the one coin, one vote are that complex systems have a tendency towards centralization through a process known as preferential attachment, where a new member of a community has a preference to attach themselves to nodes in the network that are already highly connected. And you can think of those highly connected nodes as either influencers in the community or sources of wealth and power in the community. And as we form this dRep program, there's you have that effect that's going to tend to centralize around a few dReps, having quite a lot of delegation. But there's another thing that we've been studying voting power. And there's an interesting effect in the voting power where as you correlate votes, which will happen with the dReps or happens by owning a lot of coins, your power grows non-linearly, and that is approximately quadratic. Now, what's the effect of that? If you take the derivative of quadratic, so if you can imagine kind of a parabola is the shape of a quadratic. When you take the derivative, you get a straight line. That derivative is quite important because that's your differential influence. So your differential influence on where you delegate your coins is not equal depending on what pool you address.
I mean, Kenric, sorry, to bring it back to the sociocratic element of this a little bit, but
yes.
So we have a number of people to address the questions to or to discuss this issue. So in a nutshell, are we talking here between what do we want to discuss here? The percentage, the impact the percentage ownership has on control, on governance control. Or another thing we could talk about here is the tendency of complex systems to be centralized.
Well, maybe okay, thank you, Stephen. Maybe the focus I want to have here is the impact of the dRep program and the tendency of that to centralize. And I'll just say that small ADA holders are going to have more influence if they delegate to large pools. And so there's going to be an incentive to kind of delegate to large pools. And that's part of what will drive towards the pools crossing these thresholds of 5, 10, and 20% holdings. Okay, and maybe I'll leave it at that and let people provide their own thoughts and comments on this issue of whether the dRep program is going to tend towards centralization or decentralization.
Okay, so again, we're going to go around. And again, if you have anything else to say broadly on this subject, that's welcome as well. Any questions are welcome as well. Ed, do you have any views of the impact of dReps to centralize?
Can you come back to me? I'm still forming some thoughts. Thank you.
Absolutely, that's fine. Okay, so I move on now to Sean, any thoughts on this, or yeah, or any of the topics that we've just been discussing? Is Sean gone, or is he?
Is
Yeah,
Sean
Sean
still
had
there?
to jump off.
Oh, Sean had to
Oh,
jump
okay.
off. Sorry about that. Mermoz.
Megan Halfin has
Yeah.
difficulty with her connection. Are you?
Yeah,
No, we are still here. We're still
Oh,
here.
excellent. Okay, good.
on the dReps, do you think there's a tendency for dReps to centralize, Mermoz?
Yeah, I think there's a tendency to centralize, and that is, I would say, almost self-obvious because it's what will normally naturally happen. As was explained before, things have tendency in nature. You see that tendency happening over and over again. There's that tendency of complex system to bunch up to like some kind of what I would call basins of attractions. And you cannot do otherwise because it's how nature functions. It's one of the fundamental rules. The reason why there's gravity is because of that. There needs to be some pots where things revolve around those pots. So if we have dReps, then things will start revolving around dReps, and they will start creating this huge gravity pool, and things will tend to centralize around them. But now, knowing that the problem is not the dRep itself, the problem is how do you make sure that the systems, even though it has this tendency of centralizing, how do you make sure it keeps on functioning properly, regardless of the centralization that will happen? You do that by ensuring that those people that are at the pool, at the basin of attraction, represent the best, represent in the best way the ideas that you are trying to put forward. So if the philosophy, they fully embody the philosophy of the entire group. So that's the only way you kind of make sure that it doesn't backfire, that even though it has this tendency of centralizing, it doesn't backfire and end up creating a massive amount of chaos in the system. So either way is going to go that way. There's no way around it. It's one of the rules of how nature works currently. So
Okay.
knowing that, we only have to think about how we fix it, how we adjust to that.
Okay, thanks for that, Mermoz. I mean, one of the themes that coming out there was the overriding concern for keeping a functional blockchain going, regardless of the level of centralization. And that's certainly been a background concern to, for example, the handover of centralized corporate control to decentralization, doing that in a way that minimizes risk. And also you referred to a need to pay attention to the capability of the groups that you're investing trust in. And if I can now move on to Jose for this question on, do you think the dRep function will have a centralizing influence? Jose?
I'd say that if left unattended, it might tend towards centralization. For several reasons, I'd say that humans have only a limited span of attention, so paying attention to thousands of dReps would be impossible in a sustainable manner. So you might just end up with whomever is in your top of mind, and that must have happened to all of us when we picked our SPOs. At the beginning, we were very, very selective, and then you pick whatever you're familiar with, and then you stick to those. So you never go back to being as open as you were in the beginning. So in that sense, those nodes, the network nodes that Kenric was mentioning just earlier, will begin to form and to gather attention from more people, and then that will end up colonizing the top of mind of everyone. So if unattended, I'd say yes, but that's not necessarily that we have to avoid the figure as it is, because I'd say that if you have the right incentive structure, that can be avoided. So things as having a cap, I know that it's difficult to set a cap because you can always replicate wallets. But if you are fully identified and you're not an anonymous individual, well, that's much harder to do. And also incentivizing representing more wallets or more individuals as part of the incentive would be, I think that would tend to not concentrate power in a small amount of dReps.
I think it's a great.
So I think if we think about a good incentive structure for dReps and for delegators, for voting delegators when selecting their dReps, I'd say that can be avoided.
That's great. Thanks, Yossi. I mean, I think you made a very interesting point about this kind of like a conundrum where you start a community and it's quite open and you have open trust. And then as you build up trust networks, there's an ironical, you trust less people because you found out who you can trust. You know, so you kind of like, you get those groups that naturally coalesce together. And I like so the main point is really what incentive structures do we need to combat that kind of tendency, you know, the tendency to centralize. You know, how can we achieve a capital state? There's obviously a relationship between that and digital identity as well. So I'll move on to this question now to Felix. What's your views on the dRep function? Do you think it's a naturally centralizing function, Felix?
Yes, very much. I think so. Also, quickly to what Jose mentioned to the incentives, I think right now we only focus on financial incentives, totally miss out on social incentives, which I think is really a large mistake. And I agree to everything what was said so far, and I would add, right now it's actually quite interesting to say on a technical layer, it's definitely more decentralized than it is right now. So I think there's really some good stuff. On the social side, not at all. Right now in Cardano, we don't see any official parties like ultra-left, ultra-right, some of this creepy shit. And dReps are the best tool to get us exactly there, to politize highly the whole environment. And just a matter of time until 4 or 5 dReps, all by coincidence from United States, all by coincidence veterans with a very same mindset, say, hey, let's team up. Let's create a party. Let's promote some ultra-right value. So for me, it's just a question of time, a matter of time. And I think the dReps is really leading a lot there. And it also destroys the ground truth. What dReps actually have been invented for, to figure out the ground truth from community to say, hey, what actually should be important to vote on. And there's this very strong debate actually. Do dReps improve this or do they mess it up? And from a social perspective, it's much more going into the mess up situation. Though right now, we only can speak hypothetical, theoretically about the whole thing. In 2 years from now, the whole conversation might look very different when we actually have knowledge and practical experience we can look back at. But in general, yes, I think it's leading very much to a decentralized and much more politicized environment.
Okay. If I break my facilitator, would you, and ask a question, would you say that the structure of Voltaire is causing centralization or decentralization? Yeah.
Compared to what? To the current situation, it's
Yeah.
more decentralized. To what we envision, maybe not really, right?
Okay. Okay, great. Thanks, Felix. Johnny, what are your thoughts on the tendency of dReps to be centralized? Sorry.
Yeah, a slightly indirect response, right? I say skin in the game theory, enlightened self-interest, and this inherent assumption that plutocracy is inherently bad. I know that the term effective altruism has gotten a black eye due to its association with Sam Bankman fraud. But I think it's easy for the proletariat to have good intentions with other people's money. It's a powerful consideration when those with decision-making power actually practice effective altruism, even though I'm not optimistic about it. A part of the fallacy of the network state is that it's not like a nation state municipality, and that we don't feel the effects of governance or bad governance in a network state the way we do when, as citizens of a nation state, we have bad leaders and bad governance in our physical real world nation states. I think, the reality is the whole effects or tendency towards, if your liberties, your things you can do are more manifest and real in the physical nation state context. In the network state, you feel it essentially in terms of number go up, right? And so, all conversations around civics tend to converge towards that idea of skin in the game, and doing things through your own enlightened self-interest to ensure that number go up. Now, if you take a system where the plutocratic voting power of whales and concentration actually sees the effective power of decentralized citizen assembly decision making, and that directly results in number go up, then there may be a convergence of self-interest, enlightened self-interest, and a tendency towards that form of governance. But I don't know if we can ever cross that divide between my enlightened self-interest and trusting the collectivism of the proletariat decision making.
Thanks for that. I mean, you raised some interesting points. Of a quick plug, I've actually got a proposal that relates to skin on the game in Fund 10 called Agency Theory, and so please vote for that proposal. And the term skin in the game, Talib, didn't just refer to plutocratic amount. He was framing stake as other dimensions of stake. Okay, so one dimension of stake is the bag you own, the numbers, when moon, all that. Other dimensions are contribution, that's another one. Another one might be reputation. And they are very sensitive to, obviously Alison's here, hi Alison, or to digital identity, for example. So I would, as a kind of pushback against what you're saying, Johnny, I would say, well, yeah, effective altruism sounds very similar to kind of concepts of meritocracy. I'm not really sure if you're familiar with Sandel's work on, the myth of meritocracy and the kind of laissez-faire kind of problems that you race to the bottom, you can get there. Who is this group of people who have bags? Why are they judged as having skin in the game when there's other dimensions of skin in the game? Yeah, if you believe that other people do have other dimensions of skin in the game, then you don't want them controlling you, do you? Do they? Particularly if you're setting up a citizens' assembly. So I would sorry to put that back on you. It's not my role as facilitator to do that properly, but I couldn't resist. And we have a hand up, Diveshan. Sorry if I murdered you.
And we also need to get back to Ed too,
before Diveshan.
But this, why don't we do it this way? Why don't Ed, you do your comment, and then I was going to open it up to the group for some wider comments. So then we go to Div next.
Sure. So a lot of these conversations really depend on what the minimum qualifications for dRep are. In CIP 1694, there's no minimum qualifications. It's essentially an address. They don't have to be unique. You can be many dReps as one individual or entity. So the question about whether dReps will lead to centralization or decentralization is kind of really contingent on that. Interestingly, if you want a system where every dRep is a unique individual, and a unique individual can't be more than one dRep, that actually most of the time requires a centralized process, which is not all bad. I mean, everyone, for example, could go through the Estonia e-residency or e-citizen process, and if they have a unique credential from Estonia, then that's pretty reliable, for example. But it's a hard process. You could do iris scans like WorldCoin, which is also a centralized process. But I'm not digressing. I'm actually quite serious in those comments.
Yeah.
So in CIP 1694, dReps will lead to centralization or representative reputations, if you will, and there'll be parties and that kind of thing. I'm not sure how to think of digital nation without some credential of unique personhood, if you will.
Yeah.
So that's my comment.
I think Johnny put in chat, and I think there's been discussion coming out of the workshops of CIP 1694 on the dRep as a DAO and all that kind of concept. And so it can be thought of in composable terms. It doesn't have to be, a single monolithic individual and everything that goes with that, But then it just creates another problem, arguably, like what is the nature of that DAO? How does it represent itself? How does it, all that kind of stuff. So there was a question. Someone wanted to ask a question. Shall I move on to that, Kenric?
Yeah, just give me a second. Just for anyone who joined late, we're discussing a report. I just put the link in and again, and we're doing it in a Sociocratic circle with 8 of us. But for the moment, I'm going to open it up more broadly to anyone who wants to comment or question about the discussion so far. So raise your hand. Div had his hand up, so maybe we'll start with Div if you still have a comment or question, Div.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
I think a lot of what was said after Stephen spoke was actually a lot of the stuff that was on my mind. Just high level, what I would say is what's coming to me and what's been prevalent in my experience as a design principle. It's always important to kind of leverage centralized between decentralized and decentralized, and kind of managing that creative tension between the two. And I think when you design systems within that, it's easier said than done. And so the person that was on the call with Megan made the comment about chaos, and I think that's a very important design principle to consider when you design such systems. So that's the first thought. Second thought I wanted to share was I've been doing a lot of work in the Netherlands for the last 8 years. It's a little bit of a closed community and not very well advertised, but there's been a open society innovation program that's been run there, top down. It's been set up by the Dutch royal family, and it's been incredible because I come from South Africa, and something like this has just not been possible to do in Africa, in my experience. So for the first time, going to a first world nation and being able to have a sandbox where we can kind of have buy-in and try and experiment in this way has been incredibly invaluable. And this has kind of brought me to this point where a lot of the things that I'm looking at now for this community is centered around dRep. And the things that I'm beginning to question for myself is, instead of just the traditional way of looking at this in terms of token inputs, how do we think about this in terms of social graphs? There was a comment here from Alison. And even some other kinds of inputs that might be valuable within a nation state kind of framework. So that's, if anyone's got thoughts or interests or papers there, love to connect. I'd love to share some stuff also.
Do you think it's necessary? Do you think that kind of connection with a real physical experience of governance is very valuable, Div, in a sense?
From my experience, I think you need complete stakeholder mapping and stakeholder engagement for nation state building. I've tried frameworks before in smart cities, charter cities, special economic zones, advised on certain projects. And it's been an absolute nightmare because of different types of policies and regulations. And there's all kinds of issues that always come up. I think at a very high level, you need stakeholder alignment to a kind of North Star. This is critical, and it's important in the framework of nation state development to develop offline communities first and then carry that culture on to online communities. That's been my key learning in working with the open society programs over the last 8 years. It's a very, very different framework to talking about organizational governance, corporate governance, etc. So I think there's very different kind of distinctions that need to be made. I think Felix touched on it, Johnny touched on it, around how governance is kind of a spray and pray, and I think that's important. So I think there's very, very different types of thinking and very different types of systems that need to be built up. And then the last thing I would share from my experience also is that ultimately, as a technologist, it doesn't really matter what technology you build because people will break it, right? And the culture basically eats technology for breakfast every day. So if you can't get that tension right with the technology, it just doesn't work. So that's a headache. That's an ongoing headache.
No, that's quite a beautiful, beautiful thought, actually. I mean, maybe the point is to break it.
Exactly.
So,
But then
yeah.
how do you? But then coming back to the design principle again is how do you manage that tension between the centralized, decentralized, and doing it in a way that's kind of a version to chaos in principle, right? And so I think this is it in a nutshell, certainly from the nation state side.
That's great input. I just want to give CMOS a chance to ask a question, because you had your hand up for a while. Thank you for your patience, CMOS.
Sure thing. So I read CIP 1694 from top to bottom. I understand some of it. And I feel like we're not ready for Voltaire. One of my concerns is the language of it seems to make a lot of presumptions of what identity is. And a specific example would be, rules and powers surrounding, responsibilities and abilities surrounding dReps. Are we not kind of presuming that dReps might not necessarily be individuals? I believe like 250 something people signed up to be dReps. I don't know, something in that ballpark. But what if that's just 5 guys? And as far as like what it can do, it's extremely powerful. But it feels like it's an attempt to like create a complicated obfuscation of bigger underlying problems, and without something as clever or more clever than some sort of KYC solution, I don't see. It feels like the engineers are too lost in how it works, and just like Catalyst, kind of sort of working on the honor system. And I feel like there's too much money at stake at this point to allow even the most remote possibility that, for example, BlackRock could vote on a proposal that simply drains the treasury. These are the kinds of things I worry about.
That's very interesting points. Particularly the problem of being maybe too close to the problem, too close to being the engineering solution. So your main concern is for the mechanism and not for what the mechanism is trying to resolve, perhaps. Maybe that's the issue. Where would you like to take this now, Kenric?
So I think what it'll do is the following. We had 2 more sections that were about the concept of a digital nation, how we would transition to that, but then also the importance of security. And I think I'm just going to combine those 2 with a focused discussion on the importance of identity in achieving any alternatives to the current design.
How about 20 minutes for that? We are already coming up to another 10 minutes.
Exactly.
So
right. That's why I want to combine them.
Okay.
I'll just say as a preface that we're working on a concept called democratic pluralism, and we have a proposal in to work on that. But whatever design alternatives you come down to, you end up needing some kind of mechanism of Sybil resistance for people not to be able to duplicate their identity. And as I've looked into this, what I've come to the realization is that there is a gigantic misconception on the principle of permissionlessness. The reason we're all able to use cryptocurrency networks and even operate cryptocurrency networks in a permissionless way is because identity is handled at the software level in each node. Every single node of these networks has a unique identity that is validated before that node is allowed to participate in the network. And without that identity validation in the software, there's no possibility of any of these networks working. And so when we went to the step of wanting to put in a human governance layer. It is my conviction that it was a very bad assumption that's written into this top line of the SIP 1694, is that we don't have the ability to identify people. Well, we don't have perfect identity, but there's all kinds of different identity solutions that could have been addressed as part of a minimum viable governance. And by refusing to look at that in a serious way as part of the first iteration, we eliminated the possibility of having better designs for the governance, and designs that, like CMOS just talked about, that would provide some guaranteed controls on being able to know who actually the governors are and what their level of influence is in this system.
So taking that, Kenric, and trying to frame it in terms of what our circle can discuss. I mean, for example, under the principles required for building a digital nation, we talked a lot about the digital identity there, but we also got there in the document protection of democratic human rights, use of pluralism, quadratic voting to allow investment in preferences when fair price on influence,
Right.
and
Right.
the use of consent to ensure how consent is used when a proposal comes along and how that abides by a constitution. There's a lot loaded in there. So given the limited time we have, is there something you'd like to focus on?
I think the focus is the following. It's my thesis that some sort of digital identity should be part of the minimal viable governance, and that that the choice to leave that out weakens us as a community. Now, I know that the community has actually pushed back on that, and there are technical hurdles that still need to be overcome. But that's my thesis, that we shouldn't be rolling out on-chain governance until we have some minimum viable approach to digital identity.
Okay, do we want to
And kick it off with that?
Do you want to go around the circle of people, or should we do an open session?
No, let's do a circle again.
Okay.
And why don't we do it in the original order?
Okay, so I'll take
That
the
is
original order on. So again, can you frame the question again?
Yeah, well, and I'd say in this round, you can think of this round as the objection round. When in a Sociocratic circle, you try to come to a decision together, and you have a round where people raise objections or concerns, and then ultimately the circle would take time to overcome those objections. So think about any objections you have to what's been talked about, and particularly about the need for digital identities.
Objections to a DID solution. Is that what you
Right.
say? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, if I can go to Ed, what do you think on this?
Yeah, so I think digital identity is a too vague of word for this question, as is DID, which is a decentralized identifier. It's just a number at its root. So the key question is, what is the minimum credential that a dRep needs to end? Is it so one of them, just interpreting sort of the democratic model would be proof of unique personhood, that there's no other dRep out there, and I'm a unique person, or a unique legal entity is, I think, another legit type of dRep. So that's an example of a credential that's held by an identity wallet that would be a better terminology than an identity. So that's just for discourse.
That's great. Okay, it's great to have those objections and observations. If I can now move on to Mermoz. What objections could you think of, or problems or issues related to a digital identity solution to dReps?
Well, and I should also say, Stephen, it's perfectly appropriate to say that you would support that too.
Yeah.
The
sure.
idea is, do you support or do you object, and what
Yeah.
would be your objections?
Yeah.
Yeah, I support the idea of a certain level, a minimum identification that should be required, because I don't think all of this I don't think governance even makes any sense in as we put it now, if there's no minimum level of accountability, minimum level of knowing who you are talking to. There are many sessions that have been organized all over. People are meeting face to face. So at a certain level, we ask ourselves, if the people that are involved in the community and that are actually manifesting that involvement by participating in all these town halls and stuff, actually show their faces or meet each other in these groups, what is the point of having all of the things, all of this governance then secret, and all of this anonymity being pushed so high, so deeply? At a certain level, it doesn't make any sense. There's a bigger risk in that than actually being open and say, okay, this is me. These are the elements of my identity. I'm participating in this because of my interest and so on. So to me, there needs to be a minimum level of identity required to participate in all of this. So
Yeah, I mean, you make an interesting point about the why the emphasis on anonymity, and maybe that's can have a distorting effect. So, but as you seem to agree with that some minimal credentials are required. So, if I could ask the same question, or ask Jose to address the same issue, whether you support it or have any issues with it, on terms of identity. I won't say digital identity, I'll just say identity and dReps.
Yeah, well, first thing is that it might not be binary. So just that total anonymity might have some advantages, in the sense that of course the dReps would be completely shielded from political or social pressures, or even security threats. Would be an advantage that you would lose if you are completely identified in your own name and your person as a citizen of a country, etc. So the solution might be somewhere in between. So this approach of the proof of personhood, or the proof of unique person, using maybe social graphs, using correlations between different wallets. There's different approaches in which you can provide a gradual approach, and what is the probability of this being a unique person. So it's not 100% and it's not 0. And in the level in which you get closer to the 100%, you might never be able to absolutely prove it. You'd be connected into an incentive structure that would incentivize the higher probability of being a unique person. So it might be not binary as again, but having a mechanism in which you incentivize the persons who have the most likeliness of being an actual person, and disincentivize the behaviors of wallets, and the relationships and the correlation between wallets, and the network effects, etc., and the reputation that you built as a dRep.
I think that's a fascinating perspective, because particularly that kind of probabilistic approach to identity. Exactly. Like for example, after all, identity is I wouldn't say relative. It has different dimensions and perspectives. Identity, and you can so maybe there is a kind of I know we may think of ourselves, I'm certainly me or something, but there are different dimensions to who I am, and also my behavior as well, in terms of who I am interacting with, and that may have a probabilistic aspect to it. And so maybe we should, that's quite a refreshing look at that issue. But again, coming on to the issue of identity and dReps, Felix, what are your thoughts on this?
I think on the technological side, very agree with what Jose just mentioned. On the cultural side, since I left my home country 2012, most of my life I lived without any passport, without any papers. And I feel really good with this. And very often I don't even think that identity and things and stuff is such an important thing, very honest. And if I would join an ecosystem, we said, in order to participate here, you need to do this and this and this, and then we give you a passport, and then you can do this. I would say, okay, fuck yourself. I'm out here directly. I go somewhere else. Well, it can be more human. Because on the cultural side of things, identity always limits people, puts them into some sort of identity where other people can always relate and whatnot. And I think on a very philosophical side, I'm very disagree with the concept of identity in general.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak from some experience on that. I won't be specific, but if you are required to have credentials, it limits the possibilities of your life experience, arguably, you know. So, and also it's going to contextualize you. Do you want to be contextualized that way? You know, what is your idea of freedom? And it's always going to be a kind of negotiation, isn't it, Felix? Between you know, what you want to do and what you have to reveal, you know. And but if you imagine a future where we have to reveal something, and that's where we're going to, like, here there are on the blockchain, it's immutable, you know. So there's kind of like, if this aspect of you is known forever, what consequences would that have? And is that a good thing or, oh, good? Well, there's an ethical dimension to it, isn't there? But I won't carry on there, but thanks, Felix, for that input. And I'll move on. I know you're patiently waiting, Seamos, for a question, but if I can just get on to Johnny on the issue of identity and not.
Yeah, I guess I'll get straight to the point of, I do not support, but not from a cypherpunk crypto anarchist point of view, but more from a standpoint that I think we're placing too much emphasis on personally and personality. And it opens up this kind of personal ad hominem attack, right? What happens when the ledger is no longer public, but our voting systems transition entirely to zero knowledge voting systems? Because that's where we're going as an industry, that we are going towards zero knowledge systems where we might be able to use zero knowledge cryptography and proofs to say this is a person or whatever, right? But not a, and so, you know, if you want WorldCoin, you know, they've already kind of, this is what the premise of what they do, right? And you support WorldCoin because they've addressed this proof of personhood problem using zero knowledge cryptography. But I say judge a dRep by the contents of their character and the merit of their ideas, or more simply, their voting record. Right. And if you don't mind, I mean, I want to go back to my point that we need to holistically decompose governance into some of its broader constituent domains. And I can't share my screen right now, but oh wait, I can. I just want to kind of highlight this, if you don't mind. And I've used this before, and you guys have been around, you might see this. I think we're talking about governance here in this quadrant, governance of Cardano. But there's so much more to governance of this kind of more broad ecosystem of considerations. And, you know, Charles has done a whiteboard video talking about the members-based organization and the technical governance, the technocratic governance around the development of Cardano. And then being permissionless, there's this whole kind of lack of governance around what's built on Cardano, because anybody can build whatever they want on or for Cardano. And some of the best tooling and dApps that we have in our ecosystem are built by what's largely semi-anonymous teams, or, you know, slightly invisible teams. And then you have this notion around governance of the ecosystem and, you know, institutions and everything else like that. And I think that we're constraining and talking about CIP 1694 on-chain governance, the pillars of Voltaire, primarily focusing down here in this lower right quadrant, but you're missing the broader points around consensus, social consensus, and some of the concerns around adversarial capture around the development of Cardano. You know, part of the reason we have CIP 1694 the way that it is because it was always going to be that. I mean, IOG decided that it was always going to be CIP 1694 because that's what they could implement given the timeframes that they had to implement something, right? And so because they control the development of Cardano, it was always going to be that answer, and it was just a matter of coming up with the best version of that answer that they could, right, through community workshops and everything else. But it was never going to be anything else.
If I may, then some counterpart to that again. Sorry, Johnny. I'm familiar with that graph, and and that kind of segmentation has been presented for a while. I know, speaking to other people find that pretty alienated by that, because everyone can't participate. You know, even a technocratic governance, only developers can participate. And that's part of the problem from large segments of our community, particularly people who have no development skills, but maybe have extremely advanced skills on economics, on governance, on philosophy, on community building. Yeah. And there's a lot of people more and more are pointing out this disjunct between the developer and what are they developing, who are they developing for, you know? So you can create this situation where you're just building this machine, okay, and you're just looking at it from a technocratic perspective. And what you just showed me is a closed loop, a closed technocratic loop. That's all I see. I don't see anything there from anyone who doesn't know anything about Haskell or something, for example. And let's be frank, if we're building corporate, and again, it comes back to maybe to your division of what are we building? Are we building a transition from a corporate entity, IOG, which is quite discrete, or are we building a governance product or something like that, or a governance for everyone? You know, and they're two quite different things. So maybe I should give you a chance to respond to that.
Johnny, actually, hold on a second. So this has been a great discussion, and we've completed that round of the circle. So what I want to do is sort of transition towards closing the meeting, and then take some more comments from the group as a whole as part of that. And C will lead us off in just a moment. So what we'll do, I drafted this on my flight home from Edinburgh, and then Stephen and Einstein have had a first critique of it, and now we're opening that up. And I'm particularly looking for volunteers to kind of lead in either critiquing or further writing each of the sections. And as we went through this, I combined section 4 and 5 because I think, you know, the meaning kind of reflected the need to do that anyways. But give a thought for a moment. I'll come back to this question. If you're particularly interested in leading one of these sections, I'd like to know that today. And then I'll close with this thought, is that there's a distinction between what part of the thesis I'm putting forward, but we'll take your feedback on and your critiques of, and we'll flesh those out as we write this up, is the following distinction: that the permissionlessness to use and operate the network is very important, but it is dependent on the identity within each software node. But that there's a difference between being either a user or even a SPO operator and being a governor of the network. And it's when you choose to participate as an active governor of the network, and I'm not even necessarily at the point, I think there's a distinction even between delegating, but it's this role of being either, I'll just give you one example. We can't get to it today, but another vulnerability we face is that without identity, the SPOs, the dReps, and the constitutional committees are going to be the same people. And so whereas you typically think of branches of governance of being independent checks and balances, we start from a point of there being no possibility of that in the Cardano governance plan. Those are the kinds of things that we have to, as a community, kind of grapple with and work to address if we're going to transition from what I'm calling a starting point of an open corporation towards something like a digital nation where you have identity as a citizen of that nation. I really appreciate everyone's thoughts, comments, critiques, and we'll be reviewing this video carefully and taking that input as we continue to work on this report.
If people want to contribute or comment, should they contact you, Kenric?
Yes, so I'll put my email in the chat right now. So please reach out by email. You can also reach out by everyone, the public can now view this document. If you'd like to be either an editor or a commenter, you can request that within the document, and I will do that.
If I can just say, if I can just thank everyone for participating, and I'm sorry if we didn't get round to everyone's questions. We did cover an awful lot of material here. This meeting is recorded. It will be time-stamped and documented. And we'll try, as Kenric says, that's why we're structuring it this way, is so that it could be hopefully used as a useful point of reference later. And this won't be the last meeting with Kenric. We'll be doing some more as well, I'm sure.
Yeah. If you're open, I'm open to staying a few more minutes if we want to let C make his comment, or anyone else before we close. Is that all right, Steve, or would you like to close?
Yeah, sure. I've just got
people.
Go
ahead, C.
Yes. I'll try to touch on 3 or 4 points that were mentioned I thought were fascinating. I just wanted to piggyback on. I think it would be helpful to just reiterate the inevitabilities that kind of constrain the ideation we have around this, and at least we're all on the same page. We can all agree that the way we all want to conduct our lives is one person, one vote. On the issue of anonymity, I definitely would agree that there should be some sort of service layer for providing digital IDs that are required to do some things. You shouldn't need anything at all to participate on the network, but in the real world, you don't need an ID to hang out in America, but if you want to vote, you kind of do need an ID. And there may be ways to provide these digital IDs to confirm unique personhood without ever actually having to give up personally identifiable information. And the one other reason why I'm thinking I'm not quite sure if we're ready is because I feel like the true answers to like anonymously confirming unique personhood would take some sort of advanced technology like AI. I envision a solution where technically this would work, like having a conversation about 2 minutes long with an AI could confirm just through your unique voice inflections that you're a person unlike any other out of billions. But the constraint we need to keep in mind is that regardless of like the structure or how somebody could create an ID, it has to be impossible for a unique person to create more than one. That is what is effective about normal IDs is I could get one or not, but I can't have two. I can't just make up whatever I like. It has to, the entire point is to confirm unique personhood. So we might be able to do the same thing without the traditional KYC process. But the most important part is this mechanism has to make it impossible for an individual to produce more than one account.
Yeah, thanks, Seamus. I mean,
Yeah.
what you just said reminds me of Jose's point about probabilistic solutions, and maybe that could feed into the AI as well, and also even complements Kenric, your point about the relationship of identity to network nodes and to roles. So because I think also there has been discussion here that in a sense, depending on how you are configured, if you like, you may take on a different network role, so that will be a different identity, that may be even a different probabilistic relationship to Jose, so
even with traditional identification solutions, the ultimate like presumption at the end of the day is you're confirming that it's mathematically impossible that it's not this person.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually that, I'll just close with that thought, because one thing I'm emphasizing too here is actually civil resistance, not civil, it won't, it'll end up being some kind of layered defense, because we never achieve perfection in any of these solutions. But thank you, CMOS. That was a terrific way to close the meeting. And maybe I'll just end. Is there anyone that feels strongly about participating with Stephen and Erikstein and I on actually drafting the report? Does anyone want to volunteer and request that we reach out to you?
I'm happy to throw you more of my pot thoughts if you'll have
Okay,
them.
yeah, absolutely. We'd love to have that. Please send me your email or, request access to the document through the link.
Okay, shall we move on
Thank you.
to start to wind down and stop the recording, maybe have an informal,
Sure.
let people let off steam a bit. So, do you want to close out, Kenric?
Actually, why don't we do this, Stephen? Part of the closeout process of a sociocratic meeting is to have a closeout round where the circle takes 1 minute, members to just respond to how they felt the dynamics of the meeting were. We can go through it fairly quickly, and if you want to just skip, that's fine. But Ed, do you want to kick us off with any reflections on how you felt the dynamics of the meeting went?
Good dynamics. No more comments.
Probably I've got the name Mermoz. Sorry, I got your name wrong.
Yeah, I liked it. It's a good dynamic too. Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you.
Jose?
Yeah, I love the dynamic. I would have liked to be a bit more prepared. I didn't know exactly what to expect from the meeting, so I felt that we left a bit of value on the table because of that. So maybe
That's a great point. Yeah, getting it out earlier would be helpful.
Yeah. Felix?
Yeah, just what I wrote in live chat. I think you both did a really great job hosting the session, and also the approach which you took with the circle, the Sociocratic approach here. I have to say everything what called circle Sociocratic usually I'm very against it. Oh, okay.
It sounds familiar, doesn't it,
For,
Felix? Where have I heard that before? I don't know.
We retried this shit for years.
Felix and I have an ongoing debate between swarms and sociocratic circles.
Exactly.
But there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of synergy between the two.
But I think you did an awesome job and really used this tool very effective with the circle. So really looking forward for more of this, and very happy as well to get convinced wrong on some of my beliefs, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Quick advert for Swarm. Swarm is also discusses these kind of subjects at its Saturday sessions. Occasionally, to look out for that as well. And last but not least, Johnny, we would really welcome your feedback on this session.
Well, yeah, I think it's effective in that I feel more open as opposed to more closed and rigid and fixated on particular ideas. And so kudos to all of you for facilitating that.
Great.
Thanks for joining us, Johnny. Appreciated your feedback.
Okay, should I stop the recording now?
Yes, please.